A few years ago, I had an interview for a data analyst job where they gave me a data set and said, do some analysis, present some insights. Sounded simple enough. I could do some analysis. At least that's what I thought, until they sent over the data set and I was completely overwhelmed. So many columns, random numbers, analysis paths. I froze for like a whole day. If you ever felt like that when opening a new data set, then this video is for you. The mistake I made was jumping straight into analysis without any structure. So in this video, I'm going to give you a step-by-step framework that you can use when approaching new data sets for a portfolio project or an interview assignment, so you don't spend a whole day panicking like I did. I call it the Spark framework. Not official, but I like it. Let's start with S. Step 1, survey the dataset. The first step is to look at the columns you have in the dataset and understand what they contain. Why is this important? Because you can't analyze what you don't understand. One of the main reasons a completely new dataset, especially one with a lot of columns, is overwhelming is because you don't even know what you're looking at first. So figuring that out is step 1. Let's look at an example. Here is a marketing data set that I generated using ChatGPT. Now, if you're new to data analytics and you felt a little bit of anxiety looking at this, that's totally normal. It's a lot of columns and a lot of data points. So let's say you received this data set with the request to do some analysis. If you got this data set with a data dictionary, that's fantastic. You could just reference that to see what each of the columns contains. However, a data dictionary isn't always available, so sometimes you just have to look through the data set and see if you can kind of figure out what each column is. So here it looks like we have a bunch of different marketing campaigns. We have the platform that they were run on, we have the product that they're for, and then we also have information about like the impressions, the clicks, the conversions of those different ad campaigns. And it looks like we also have some information about who owns this data or who owns this marketing campaign as well. Now, a pro tip for you, since we live in the age of AI, you can actually give this data set to an AI tool and have it explain what the columns contain. You can have it describe the data set. Only do this if the data set that you have doesn't contain sensitive data. The data set that I'm using was generated by ChatGPT and it contains synthetic data. It's not real data. So putting it into an AI tool and asking it to describe the data is pretty safe. So it would be fine to do this with like a publicly accessible data set. But if you have something that's like company specific or it has like proprietary information or any type of sensitive data, just look at the data set yourself. Don't feed it into like a free version of an AI tool. So we'll just ask it to describe the columns in this data set. All right, so here's what we get as the descriptions for the columns in our data set. It even provided us categories for each of the columns. Now that we have a description of the columns, we can also load the data set into like a pandas data frame like I'm doing here. And we can look at the shape and the data types of the data set. So here we can see we have 375 rows and 26 columns. And these are the data types of our data set. So the takeaway, don't skip this step. This is the step that tripped me up in my interview project. I tried to jump straight into visualization without getting a good understanding of what columns I had at my disposal. Step 2, profile the data quality. Now that we know what columns we have, let's see how many of them are actually usable. This is important because we don't want to build our analysis on bad data. This includes checking the following. Do any columns have missing data? And if so, what proportion of values are missing? Do the column data types match the actual data? For example, are integers coming in as strings? And does the data set contain duplicated data? This step helps you understand what columns you can actually use for analysis and how much of a data cleaning effort there will be. So scanning our data set, we can see that we have some missing values in this customer segment column. And we also have some missing values in the campaign spend column. It looks like notes is pretty sparsely filled out as well. So we'll have to see if that's really a column we can use, but just with an initial look at it, it seems like maybe it may not be. And by the way, if this is a data set that was okay to feed into AI, you could also use AI to find the data quality issues. So we could just ask Claude here, to identify any data quality issues. For example, missing values, duplicated data, or mismatched data types. Okay, so here you can see it mentioned the missing values that we found as well. It did find some more duplicate rows than what we found on just an initial scan. And it also found this interesting casing inconsistency within the columns as well. And here's just a summary of all the issues that it found. The takeaway in this step: document these issues, especially if this is for an interview or for a portfolio project. It's good to mention any data quality issues you find. It shows that you're able to think critically about a data set and that you don't just jump into an analysis blindly. It's also good practice to just keep track of these issues so that if you wanted to replicate this analysis again, you would know what cleaning steps you performed before because you have it all tracked. Step 3, assess column values. Now let's start looking through individual columns and understanding the unique values they contain. Up until this point, we know what columns we have, but we're not that familiar with what data lives in each of those columns. For text columns, you can check, is the data categorical or freeform? What are the unique values? For numeric columns, you can see what's the range. What are the min, max, median, average values? Is the data continuous or discrete? Especially as you start to look through the distinct values of text columns, you'll probably start to formulate some questions about the data set. So going back to our example and going back to VS Code, let's see the unique values of campaign names. So here we have things like flash deal, clearance, spring promo, winter sale, and brand awareness. So those are the types of campaigns that are present in this data set. We can also look at the date ranges for this data set. So we can print out the min and max of the date value. So it goes from January to March end of 2024. We can also just do a general describe on the data set to get those averages, mins, and maxes of all the numeric columns. So here you can see on average there's about 30,000 impressions per campaign, about 900 clicks, and around 39 conversions. The takeaway: this is the step where you might start to see a bit of the story in the data set, because now you're seeing actual data, not just column labels. Step 4, relationships. Column relationships, that is. After you know what values the columns contain, you can start to investigate how they relate to each other. This is where you'll see patterns start to emerge in the data set. One of the most common ways to do this is by using visualizations, things like line charts, scatter plots, histograms. In this step, you can also plot the distributions of individual columns as well. In this step, you start to understand more about what the data set contains and the context that it exists in. In our example, you would start to build an intuition about how these marketing campaigns might actually work in practice. So as an example, let's plot the relationship between campaign spend and conversions. So here's the code that we would use to create a scatter plot of this relationship. And when I run that, here you can see that there's kind of a slight positive correlation between campaign spend and conversion. So that might be something to dive deeper into when you're actually doing EDA. As another example, we could also do a histogram of campaign spend just to look at how those values are distributed. So if we run this, we can see that it looks like most campaigns spend around $200 to $300 with a few high spenders as well. The takeaway: it's important to start simple here. You don't need to visualize every single relationship or every single column, but pick 3 or 4 that either interest you if you're doing a portfolio project, or 3 or 4 that seem relevant to business questions if you're doing this as part of an interview assignment. Step 5, key questions. Now that you have a good understanding of what the data set contains, what values are in each column, and a little bit of knowledge about the relationship between the columns, you can start defining the questions you want to answer in your analysis. If you're doing this as part of a portfolio project, these questions can just be around things you found interesting in the dataset. But if you're doing this analysis as part of an interview, think about who your stakeholder is and what kinds of questions they might want answered. For example, a marketing manager would care about different things than an operations manager. So for our dataset, let's say a marketing team member asked us, what does this data tell us about campaign campaign performance. There's a lot of different things and metrics we could focus on, but let's focus on click-through rate, or CTR, for this one. We could ask, which customer segments saw the highest CTRs? Was there a time of year and corresponding campaign that led to higher CTR rates? How does campaign spend relate to CTR? Pick 2 or 3 questions to start. You can always explore more later or even change directions entirely if your analysis doesn't really lead to any interesting results. The takeaway: define your questions and pick a theme. With a data set like this, it gets really overwhelming because there's so many different analysis paths you could take. But starting with a theme, for our use case, it's around CTR, and defining questions you want to answer, it makes everything a lot easier because now you know what you're actually trying to find. So with the Spark framework, you're able to actually approach a new data set. And then from here, you can actually implement any data cleaning steps that you need, and you can do exploratory data analysis, or your actual analysis of the data set. So going back to that interview, I actually ended up getting that job. But I could have done it without all the panic if I had just used this framework. So hopefully, if you're working on a portfolio project or prepping for an interview assignment with a brand new data set, the Spark framework can help you. Are there other steps that you take when you're approaching a new data set that I didn't mention? If there are, let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.